Visual evidence shows that the Ukrainians are advancing in the west of Vovchansk and that they are trying to cut off the Russians in the south. We also have a new poll by the Ukrainians that shows the support for the ongoing war and how likely Ukraine is going to win according to what the Ukrainians believe, whether it's time to start peace negotiations, and a lot more interesting data that we've received with this poll. And we have news from Russia that shows that in the midterm, at least, it might have some issues with manpower as well, but we'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front lines in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine continues to strike Russia's oil infrastructure. Again, in Rostov, oil depots have been hit. Videos showed evidence that they were hit and fires have started. The Russians are doing infighting about who is responsible to protect those. Some mill bloggers are complaining they don't have mobile fire teams like the Ukrainians that hunt down drones that the Ukrainians have built up against the Shahid drones. On the northern front line, no change that I can report in the western part, and in the east we have an interesting development. Here, a visual evidence has shown the Ukrainians to having advanced here in this direction. And if we look at the Institute for the Study of War, they believe that the Ukrainians came from the west, so only one block would be left in total under Russian control, and one block is roughly 250 meters. So according to the Institute for the Study of War, only this block might be left under Russian control, while the Russians have actually advanced in the south here, as you can see, south of the Vovcha, the river through Vovchansk. I talked about it in the last situation report that we had the Russians in the south here, so this might turn into an envelopment. Now then again, we have to keep the hopes low. We are probably talking about at most a few dozen men. This is not going to be a strategic victory, even if the Ukrainians are able to encircle them and neutralize them. And as we've talked about in the past, while the Russians have probably been cut off in this area, we've never seen visual evidence of significant number of losses, of significant capitulations, anything like this. So yeah, we'll have to see. It's some tactical development that might be positive for the Ukrainians, but nothing decisive overall. On the eastern front, north of the Seversky Donetsk, I do not see any change over the last few days. So we switch right to the southern part. Here in the Bakhmut area, I have no change again. But we have Russians advancing in the area of Pivnichne. Here we have them showing us having geolocated on the eastern part of Pivnichne, and probably that should be Drushba. I'm not sure exactly where the demarcation between the two towns are, probably the railroad line. So basically the Russians have advanced up to here and roughly up to here, probably another 300 to 400 meters towards the west, mostly along the railroad line, or at least close to it. South of it, the Russians are advancing here in the west of their penetration into the Ukrainian lines in the direction of New York. They have roughly captured this area here, 2 tree lines from what I've seen. They are basically continuing to secure their flanks in this regard. They also advanced here along the railroad line, took another tree line in the direction of Prores. That was the success the Russians had here. South of Novoselivka Persha here in the east, they were able to take another tree line there as well in the area here. I think it was even 2. I'm not completely sure now. I apologize for this, but this is again probably to some degree Ukrainian withdrawal at some points, them doing delaying actions, especially in south of Yasno Brodivka. Here again, the Ukrainians have given up the tree lines here. We have the Russians now under full control of them, and to the east as well. There again, the map indicates that the Ukrainians will basically have no choice to slowly withdraw in this area. Otherwise, they would be under the threat of envelopment. South of it, we have a Russian success in Krasnohorivka. Here they have advanced in the western part. We have visual evidence of this as well, that the Russians are now here. In the past, we've seen them, I think, roughly here. We've seen them here and up here. So the front line is probably more or less along this here now. Here not another small Russian success, another probably 300 to 400 meters where they have advanced. That was already it from territorial changes. I have nothing in the south. The Ukrainians have lost Uroshaine, which was a significant blow in the, but I already reported it in the last situation report, so I have nothing fresh here. We can switch directly over to the Russian recruitment, and there some indications are showing that they might have problems in the future. We have it again, the Russians saying the Russian Ministry of Defense is not planning a mass dismissal of mobilized personnel. The rumors that have appeared on the internet are someone's invention. This was stated by the head of the State Duma committee. The State Duma deputy denied rumors that appeared on Russian resources about the alleged preparation of a mass dismissal of mobilized personnel, which is to take place this fall. Unknown sources stated that approximately 150 mobilized personnel will be sent home and another 200,000 will be rotated and sent to rear areas. So they are saying nothing is going to happen. We are not going to let them out. However, according to Karat, the military department is not preparing a new mobilization within the framework of which a new wave of soldiers could be called to replace the first. So there will be no demobilization until the end of the war. This was reported even earlier. What the Russians are saying, if you had the bad luck of being called up, you're going to stay in this war until you've won it, until you're in a wheelchair or until you're in a coffin. That's the outcome. This has a significant advantage for the Russians as they limit the burden of the mobilization to the families of roughly 315,000. That was their official number that they recruited. It limits it completely to those. If you were lucky the first time, you are being told that you will not be called up. This is obviously advantageous because it keeps the Russian population happy or at least content with the current situation. It leads to, it prevents another mass fleeing of young men out of the country as happened with the last time. But at the same time, it means that everyone who was called up awaits a dire fate until the Russians win fast. Now, first of all, let's talk about the numbers. I have no idea how they come to 350,000, but it's clear that among the mobilized personnel, there have been significant losses, so a lot of them are not even alive anymore. This isn't even possible, but this also means that Russia is telling its population, if you get mobilized, you will stay until the end of the war. Right now, they are still able to create enough manpower with volunteers, with high payments. They are trying to get foreign mercenaries to take the flag, to hold the flag up, basically, and they have some success in this, but we see it domestically that they had to increase the signing bonuses up to 5 times in the first oblasts. We know from Tatarstan that is basically the first oblast I read about where the Russians started to do something you would call affiliate marketing, where if you have signed up and find someone else to sign up for you as well, then you get a bonus as well. So they try modern marketing techniques. This is additional money they have to spend at a time where their money reserves are being drained, at the time where they have to raise taxes. So this is done because it's needed, because there are no longer enough volunteers without raising the payments. This shows that while this might continue some more time, at some point they will struggle to find enough volunteers, and at that point they either have to do another mobilization or they have to live with reduced numbers along the front line. Another mobilization at that point, if we are past 3 years of mobilization initially, or maybe even past 4 years, will obviously mean that the population who is being called up believes that they will be sent to the slaughterhouse. And this should cause massive unrest inside of Russia. This should cause massive desertion. This should cause attempts to flee the country once again. So while Russia keeps the lid on by not letting the people out, it causes significant problems for the future should it ever be needed to do another mass mobilization. Now, you hear that I use should and could. This is not for sure. It's far too early to claim that Russia has a manpower problem. Ukraine has one right now. But by doing this, by limiting the impact of the mobilization to a limited amount of families, Russia will create problems in the future that might come back to haunt it. We'll have to see in the future, but this is obviously a risky game from the Russian side, hoping that they'll be able to have enough volunteers. Otherwise, they might cause massive domestic unrest. In the political sphere, we have a very interesting survey. I've made a summary for you. I'll put the link in the description, at least if I don't forget it. It says 44% are still 44% of the Ukrainians believe it's time to start peace negotiations. 35% don't think it's the time now, and 21% are undecided. So a relative majority is for starting peace negotiations. Interesting is that the inhabitants of eastern Ukraine with 33% are the least likely. So those that are most impacted are the least likely to agree, with 33%. In the south, 60% are willing. Now, if we take the south here, this is a part that would have been, prior to the war, being called pro-Russian or Russian part of Ukraine, which is obviously false. It's at best a Russian-speaking part of Ukraine. It shows that the willingness to negotiate seems to be higher in these parts that are Russian-speaking but not affected by the war as massively as the other parts. 83% say that they should not do a withdrawal from the annexed but still controlled territory. So 83% are not willing to, for instance, give up this, and this, which Russia has annexed. 84% are against handing it over. This seems kind of superfluous, I think is the word. Like, it's almost the same, but I guess withdrawing and turning it neutral is something different to handing it over to Russia directly. So basically, over 80% are against withdrawing from the annexed territories that Ukraine still controls. 77% do not want the West to end all sanctions. 54% are against neutrality in a peace agreement. 22% are in favor of this. In the west of the country, only 9% are in favor. In the east, 23% are in favor. In the center, 25%. And in the south, again, 39%. This shows how the demography of the countries, how the ethnicity, you could call it, depending on how you politically you want to frame it, and of course how the impact of the war influences the decisions by the population itself. 76% believe that Putin will only sign peace under his conditions. So they are for negotiations, but 3/4 believe that Putin will basically demand a capitulation anyways, which is kind of contradicting. And for peace, 51% demands the liberation of the occupied territory. So still a slightly more than half wants that Ukraine receives every territory that it had 1991, but as we are at that point now, only 51% are in favor of this. 26% are willing to agree to peace at the control line of 22. So 51% want everything. Another quarter wants everything but the occupied territories from 14 to 22. And only 9% are willing to sign peace along to the current front line, showing that over 90% are basically not willing to accept the current status and actually want to improve Ukraine's situation. 61% in a separate question say they don't want to give up anything in negotiations, so they're willing to negotiate while believing Putin will demand will only accept what he demands, and they themselves more than are willing to negotiate, saying we don't want to give up anything either, showing that the willingness to negotiate might rise, but the willingness to accept the result of negotiations is far from having come to Ukraine. 14% would be willing to give up the pro-Western alignment, and only 8% would be willing to give up territory. 66% are still believing in victory, 18% do no longer believe in it, and 18% are unsure. So the self-assurance is falling, but it's still significant. 2/3 are still believing Ukraine will be victorious in the war. Then there were questions where the Ukrainians could say yes and no at the same time to some somewhat conflicting information. So don't worry, don't be surprised if this is somewhat contradicting. But 82% are believing with enough Western weapon war is possible. Victory is possible. 76% believe with organized mobilization and own defense production, victory is possible. So 3/4 believe that if Ukraine just gets, and pardon my French, if 76% just gets its shit together, if Ukraine gets it done, then they might be victorious in this. I think this is, to be honest, defense production. This should be delusional, but this is my personal opinion. Let's continue in the poll. 69% believe Western personnel is necessary for victory. This is obviously a contradiction to 76% believing Ukraine can do it on its own. That 69% believe Western personnel is also needed. As said, they had the ability to give contradicting answers. And 46% believe it's not a shame to avoid mobilization. 46%. 29% believe it is. So we see half of the population is basically willing to shrug when it comes to somebody avoiding mobilization, while 76% believe a better organized mobilization will be needed for victory and will allow for victory. This is obviously highly contradictional, which should not be a surprise in a massive survey with a lot of different questions, but it shows that overall the assurances of the Ukrainian side to be victorious in the war is going down. But at the same time, it's still significantly high. Ukrainians are still in the majority willing to continue fighting. They are still believing in victory, even though, as said, 46%, almost half, believe that avoiding the call up is not a shame to the individual doing it. This is obviously going to be a problem in manpower terms, because if that number keeps rising, then Ukraine might over the midterm have issues calling up enough reserves if the population increasingly is willing to shrug over it and to look over it. But that was it from me for now. A mixed bag today in messages in regards to Ukraine. Some good news, some bad news, but we'll keep observing what is going on here. If you like the situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments and the current surveys and Russia's issues with its mobilized personnel? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.